I wanted to make a quick video explaining Getty to you guys. It's not super important, so we don't want to spend a lot of time on it. By the way, if you hear some rustling or rumbling, that's my son down there. He's playing right now. So Getty is, if you recall, we talked about teletype terminals early on in the semester. So remember, if you do, PS-AUX, pipe, grep, TTY, you'll see all the teletype terminals. And those are literally a connection to the kernel. That's what that means. And if you recall, we talked about a teletype terminal. Originally, they were machines like this, and you would have them and they would be connected together over great distances. So you would have one in Boston, one in New York, and whatever you typed in Boston would print out in New York and vice versa, right? And back in the day, we used to have, remember in like the 1940s and 50s when you built a computer and you had to get information into it, you might have heard of punch cards, right? So literally at that time, a computer, a mainframe, ran one program at a time, and it was determined by punch cards. So you would take your program, however many thousands of cards, feed them all through, and it would execute that one program. Obviously, as we had, what we call multi-user machines, where multiple people would be logging in and doing different things, where you wanted to run commands, that's not going to work very well. So they needed some way to input information, and back then they thought we should type in words. And he's fine. Don't worry about him. Don't you cry. Okay, so the first keyboards that they were repurposed teletype terminals, and literally, if you were to kind of draw it out, that's the wrong, there we go. So if you were to kind of draw it out, you would have a mainframe, and then you would have, your TTY, and it would have a wire that would go in. And then later on, they figured out, you know what, we don't even need to be in the same building as a mainframe, particularly because a lot of times you wanted to put the mainframe someplace really cool, because they would get kind of hot, so you might put it in a basement somewhere. So you might have somebody, way over here, right? And they would have a wire that would go directly in. And at every TTY, at every teletype terminal, you could enter in commands. That's the way things were like in 1960. Right, back then, those computers. That legacy carries on today in Linux with these TTYs, right? Now, a getty, right, is get TTY, right? Now, if you were to look, if you do ls slash, sbin, sbin is for like root user type applications, and if you do Getty, right, you would see it there. And if we replace ls with ls-l, we would see that Getty is a symbolic link to a Getty. Getty was original code from the Unix system, and as we talked about, a lot of that has been replaced. Obviously, that has been literally 60 years. So there are reasons you want to replace that code. A Getty is a very common one you'll find. Sometimes you'll have the link to a Getty, sometimes you won't. And you probably won't see it running anymore because typically nowadays, let's search for logon. So typically that logon daemon has taken on the role of what Getty did, right? So Getty's original job was to get a terminal that you could log into, because you don't have somebody physically plugging in a wire anymore. So it would get a virtual terminal, which then you could connect through. Nowadays, so much of that work has been taken over by the login daemon. It does start up on most systems, but then it usually, immediately spins off logon if you're on a text-based interface, or it'll spin up the graphical login if you're on a GUI, right? That's all it does. So I don't need to really get into what all the details of it because it's very old. But if you ever see anything like that, or anybody asks about, Getty, what they're talking about is the thing that starts the logon process by getting that first teletype terminal, right? And the teletype terminal is the way that you can interact with the kernel. One other thing I want to point out is, oftentimes when you see, like, if you see it actually running, like if you see it in the process, it'll be like sbin/getty or a getty or n-getty. There's a few different variations. And then some number, and then like tty. It's always going to be tty1. It's never going to be connected to the other tty's. But this is saying this is the original program that started it. This is the baud rate, and this is the teletype terminal it's connected to. The baud rate is literally, it's a holdover from when it was a wire. If I have a wire and I connect, I need to figure out how often does the pulse go from positive to negative, right? How often does this happen? And then if it doesn't happen, I can figure out, does that indicate a 1 or a 0, right? So this, in this case, this would be 0, 1, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, right? But I have to know how often, how quickly does it go up and down for that to happen. So it's kind of like the frequency, except we're talking about a wired connection. The baud rate isn't used for anything anymore because there's nothing physically connected. But for backwards compatibility to 1960, it's still in there on some systems. That's quick. That's all I wanted to say about Getty. It's not something that comes up a lot, but you should know the term. It might be on the Linux Plus exam.